The destination wedding in Santorini was supposed to be the most beautiful day of my brother's life. I know this because he told me so, approximately 47 times in the 8 months leading up to it. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, or at least what I told myself none of us knew, was that by the time the sun set over those famous white cliffs, I would be sitting alone in my apartment in Austin, Texas, watching my entire financial life detonate in slow motion on a laptop screen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where this really started, which was not in Greece, and not on the night everything fell apart. It started on a Wednesday afternoon in February, when my brother called me from a rooftop bar in Miami and announced, with the confidence of a man who has never once balanced a checkbook, that he was engaged. Her name was Camille. He had known her for 4 months. I said congratulations. I meant it, mostly. My brother is the kind of person who fills a room, loud, magnetic, the type who makes strangers feel like old friends within 20 minutes. Camille, from everything I could see on her Instagram, was the same. They were beautiful together. They were also, in the most loving way I can say this, completely financially irresponsible together. My brother worked in sales, the kind where the commission checks came in waves, feast or famine. Nothing in between. Camille was a part-time yoga instructor who also sold essential oils online. I am a certified public accountant. I have been doing other people's taxes since I was 22 years old. I know what a healthy financial picture looks like, and I know what a house of cards looks like, and I love my brother. So I said congratulations and asked if they had set a date. Santorini, he said. September. Destination wedding. 60 guests. I did the math in my head instantly, the way I always do. Flight from the US to Greece. Hotel for a week minimum. The ceremony, the venue, the photographer, the caterer, the flowers flown in because Camille wanted peonies, and peonies are not native to the Greek islands in September. I put the number somewhere north of $80,000 just for the event itself, before a single guest bought a plane ticket. Where is the money coming from? I asked. He laughed. It always works out, he said. It never just works out. That is not how money works. But he was my brother, and I had learned a long time ago that some lessons cannot be taught, they can only be lived. So I said I was happy for him, and I meant that part completely, and I hung up and went back to my quarterly reports and tried not to think about it. I failed at not thinking about it. Over the next several months, the wedding became the center of gravity for our entire extended family. My parents, who are retired and living on a fixed income that I help supplement quietly every month because they have never quite recovered from the decisions they made in the 1990s, suddenly became consumed by the planning. My mother was in the family group chat constantly, sending photos of floral arrangements and table linens and asking everyone's opinion on whether the sunset ceremony should start at 6 or 6:30. My father was calling my brother almost daily. The energy was festive and electric and completely disconnected from the question of who was actually paying for any of it. I was not in the wedding party. This was not an accident. My brother and I had a conversation about it early on, and he was gentle but honest. Camille's sisters were the bridesmaids, and the groomsmen were his college friends, and he hoped I understood. I did understand. I also understood that being outside the wedding party meant I was being invited as a guest, which meant I was expected to fly to Greece, book my own hotel, buy a gift, and sit in the audience for an event that would cost me approximately $3,000 out of pocket just to attend. I went back and forth on it for weeks. In the end, I booked the flight. He was my brother. Some things are not about money, even for an accountant. What I did not do was offer to help pay for any of it. I had watched my parents' situation too closely for too many years to open that door. I knew how it worked. You offer $500 for the flowers, and suddenly you're on the hook for the photographer. You cover the photographer, and somehow the catering bill lands in your lap. I had seen this movie before. I kept my wallet closed and my boundaries clear, and I told myself that was the responsible thing to do. My brother never asked me directly, which, looking back, should have been a sign. The group chat activity peaked about 3 weeks before the wedding, then went strangely quiet. I assumed everyone was just busy with travel logistics. I was finishing up a client audit that had been eating my life for 2 months, and I was grateful for the silence. I packed my bag, submitted my out of office, and flew to Athens on a Thursday morning, connecting through London, arriving in Santorini at 11 p.m. Local time with a headache and a carry-on that was slightly too heavy. The island was, objectively, stunning. I will give them that. Even arriving exhausted in the dark, I could feel the particular quality of the air there, dry and warm and smelling faintly of salt and something floral I couldn't name. My hotel was small and clean, about a 15-minute drive from the venue, and I fell asleep before I could even finish unpacking. The rehearsal dinner the next evening was where I first started to feel the specific unease that I now recognize as my instincts trying to tell me something. The venue was a terrace restaurant perched directly over the caldera, white walls and blue domes and the whole postcard image, and it was clearly expensive in the way that things are expensive when no one is talking about the price. My brother was effusive and happy. Camille was radiant. My parents were dressed like they were attending the Met Gala. Everything was fine. Everything was perfect. Except, my father pulled me aside near the end of the evening, out onto a smaller terrace away from the other guests, and he put his hand on my shoulder the way he does when he's about to ask me something he already knows the answer to. Things got a little tight, he said. I looked at him. With the planning, he clarified. The vendor deposits were higher than we expected. We had to move some things around. What things? I asked. He looked out at the view. The caldera at night was black and glittering and enormous. He said, Nothing to worry about. We just need to know that if anything comes up this weekend, we can count on you. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. The old pull, the one that had been there since I was 12 years old, and understood for the first time that our family's financial situation was not like other families. The one that said, You're the responsible one. You have to fix it. I said, I'm here as a guest. I'm not the backup plan. He nodded like he agreed with me. He put his arm around me and said, of course, and we went back inside and I spent the rest of the evening smiling at people I barely knew and telling myself I was overreacting. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. I will say that without any qualification. The sun was low and gold, the kind of light that makes everything look like it was shot through a filter, and my brother cried when he saw Camille walk toward him in her dress. And it was real. I could see that it was real, and for approximately 2 hours I forgot everything else and just let it be a wedding. Then the reception started. I was seated at a table near the back with some of Camille's extended family and 2 of my brother's college friends I vaguely recognized. The food was extraordinary. The wine was generous. The speeches went long. I was on my second glass of something local, and pale and cold, when my phone buzzed in my clutch, and I glanced at it out of habit. It was a credit alert notification. I use a monitoring service, Occupational Habit, and I have it set to flag anything unusual. The alert said, New hard inquiry on your credit report. Creditor, Aegean Events Mediterranean. Date, 47 days ago. I stared at the notification. 47 days ago, I had not applied for credit with any Mediterranean event company. I had not applied for credit with anyone 47 days ago. I was in the middle of an audit 47 days ago, and my life was spreadsheets and client calls, and not once had I so much as glanced at a credit application. I put my phone face down on the table and picked up my wine glass. I told myself it was probably an error. Monitoring services throw false alerts sometimes. I would check it in the morning. My phone buzzed again. Another alert. New account opened. Balance, $14,000. Account type, Vendor Services Line of Credit. The wine went sour in my mouth. I excused myself from the table and walked through the reception toward the edge of the terrace, away from the music and the dancing and the sound of my brother laughing at something his new father-in-law had said. I pulled up the full alert on my phone. The account had been opened 7 weeks ago. The associated address was my parents' home in Phoenix. The inquiry had come from a device registered in Maricopa County, Arizona. I was in Austin, Texas, 7 weeks ago. I had not been to Phoenix in 4 months. I stood there with the Aegean Sea spread out below me in the dark and felt the cold move through me despite the warm evening air. I opened my credit monitoring app fully and logged in. There were 2 inquiries I didn't recognize. There was 1 new account I hadn't opened, and there was a notation I had never seen before, a rental agreement verification pull from a company called Aegean Events Mediterranean, which, when I searched it, turned out to be the company that had planned and hosted this wedding. The rental agreement on file listed the responsible party for the venue deposit $22,000, charged against a line of credit as Claire M. Whitfield. My name. I went back inside. I found my father at the bar. I put my phone in front of his face and I showed him the screen and I said, "Explain this to me right now." He looked at the screen. He looked at my face. He put down his drink. And then he said something that I will probably hear for the rest of my life in that specific register that means someone is trying to minimize a catastrophe they created. It's more complicated than it looks. Over the next 20 minutes, standing in a corner of the most expensive party I had never agreed to throw, I got the full picture. My parents had not had the money to cover the venue deposit when it came due 6 weeks before the wedding. My brother didn't know this, or claimed not to know this. I still don't know what the truth is there. My parents had applied for a line of credit using my name, my social security number, which they had from years ago when they were on my car insurance, and my credit score, which is excellent because I have spent 15 years being careful to secure the venue deposit and 2 other vendor payments. The forgery wasn't sophisticated. My mother had practiced my signature from a card I'd signed at Christmas. It was close enough to pass a scan. They had planned to pay it off with the cash gifts from the wedding, my father explained. The guest list was 60 people. Many of them, Camille's family, who apparently had money, and they had estimated the cash gift total would more than cover the balance. They were going to tell me afterward, once it was paid off. I would never have known. I looked at my father. He was still in his wedding guest suit, pocket square, perfectly folded, and he was watching me with an expression I recognized from my entire childhood, the one that said he knew he had done something wrong, but was still fundamentally waiting for me to make it okay. I walked away from him. I walked back to my table, picked up my bag, and told the couple next to me I wasn't feeling well. I went outside and called a cab back to my hotel. My phone started ringing before I got there. My mother, I let it go to voicemail. My brother and this told me that my father had already gone to tell him, called twice. My mother called again. Then my father. Then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be my Aunt Patricia, who had apparently been briefed on the situation and felt it was her place to mediate at 11 o'clock at night in the middle of her nephew's wedding reception. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, and I did not answer any of them. I opened my laptop instead. I spent the next hour documenting everything. I took screenshots of every alert, every account, every inquiry. I pulled my full credit report from all 3 bureaus and saved them. I found the vendor contract through the event company's online portal. I had a login because I had been listed as the account holder, which meant they had sent me access credentials to an email address that was close to mine, but had 1 letter transposed, one my parents had apparently created and monitored themselves. I downloaded the contract. My signature was at the bottom, written in my mother's handwriting, pretending to be mine. At some point after midnight, my brother knocked on my hotel room door. I opened it because he was my brother and because some part of me still believed in that moment that he was coming to tell me he hadn't known. I needed to believe that. He looked terrible, loosened tie, the specific exhaustion of someone who had been crying while also trying not to ruin their wedding night. He asked if he could come in. I stepped back and he sat in the chair by the window. I sat on the bed. Outside, the island was quiet. He said, "I didn't know they used your name." I said, "Did you know they were out of money?" A long pause. Then, "I knew things were tight." I said, "Things being tight and committing identity fraud are not the same category of problem." He flinched. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know how to fix it. He said Camille was devastated. She had no idea any of this had happened with the financing. Her family had offered to help originally, but my parents had insisted they had it handled. He said a lot of things. Some of them I believed. Some of them I filed away for later, for when I had the distance to evaluate them properly. I told him I was not going to cover the debt. I told him I was going to report the fraudulent accounts to my bank and to the credit bureaus first thing in the morning. I told him I was sorry that this was happening on his wedding night, and I meant that. I genuinely meant it. But I was not going to absorb a $14,000 line of credit opened in my name without my consent, in order to protect people who had decided my credit score was a resource they were entitled to use. He nodded slowly. He didn't argue. That surprised me. He asked, "What about Mom and Dad?" I said, "They're adults. They made a choice. They have to deal with the consequences of that choice. He left. I don't know what he said to them. I didn't ask. I was up before dawn. I had already drafted an email to my bank's fraud department the night before, and I sent it at 5 a.m. with all documentation attached. I called the fraud hotline when they opened, which meant sitting on hold for 45 minutes on an international line that was costing me per minute, and I went through the entire account with a specialist who walked me through every step. I filed disputes with all 3 credit bureaus. I contacted Aegean Events Mediterranean directly and informed them in writing that the contract bearing my name had been executed fraudulently and that I was not the responsible party. I sent that email to both their general address and to the specific account manager whose name was on the contract. Then I called the non-emergency line for the local police precinct in Phoenix and asked how to file a report for identity theft committed by a family member. The officer I spoke with was patient and thorough, and did not seem surprised, which told me something about how often this particular situation comes up. My mother called while I was on that call. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to it afterward, she was crying and telling me I was destroying the family, and that she had done everything for me my whole life, and this was how I repaid her. My father left a voicemail that was shorter and harder. He said that the contract was in my name, that legally I might be on the hook regardless, that it would be easier for everyone if I simply handled it quietly. That one I listened to twice. The second time, I noticed that he wasn't asking me to forgive them. He wasn't even asking me to understand. He was managing me. He was still trying to engineer the outcome that was most convenient for him, dressed up in the language of family loyalty. I had spent 32 years being engineered. I was done. My flight home was the following afternoon. I spent the morning on the terrace of my hotel, drinking coffee and watching the light move across the water, which is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen in my life. And I am glad I saw it, even in the circumstances in which I saw it. Grief and beauty are not mutually exclusive. You can lose something and still notice that the light is extraordinary. My bank responded within 48 hours of my return home. The fraudulent account was flagged, the dispute was opened, and I was issued a formal case number. The credit bureau disputes took longer, about 3 weeks, but all 3 were eventually resolved in my favor. The unauthorized account removed, my score restored. Aegean Events Mediterranean responded to my email within a week, informing me that they were referring the matter of the forged contract to their legal department and would be pursuing the actual responsible parties for the outstanding balance. That outstanding balance, as of that email, was $9,400. The venue deposit had been partially covered by wedding gifts, as my parents had planned, but the remainder was still owed. My parents hired a lawyer. I know this because the lawyer sent me a letter attempting to argue that I had implicitly authorized the credit application by previously sharing financial information with my family. This argument has no legal merit, as I confirmed with my own attorney, whom I called the same afternoon I received the letter. My attorney responded within the week. I have not spoken to my parents since the hotel room in Santorini. My mother has sent several emails and a handwritten letter, the letter being the most difficult thing to receive because her handwriting is familiar to me in the way that only a parent's handwriting can be. I learned to read from notes she left on the refrigerator. The letter said she was sorry, but also said I had overreacted, and that family is supposed to protect each other. I read it once and put it in a folder I have labeled, with the particular dark humor of someone who processes things through organization, documentation. My brother and I have spoken twice. He is trying to hold the middle ground, which I understand and do not fault him for, though I have told him clearly that there is no version of reconciliation that does not start with our parents taking full accountability for what they did. Not an apology delivered through him. Not a letter that contains the word overreacted. Full, direct, unambiguous accountability. He said he would pass that along. I believe he did. Several relatives have reached out to tell me I am being too hard on my parents. One uncle told me that older people don't understand credit the way younger people do, which is interesting given that my parents successfully executed a multi-step fraud involving forged signatures, a spoofed email address, and a fabricated credit application. That is not a lack of understanding. That is a plan. 4 months after the wedding, here is what is true. My credit is clean. The fraudulent account is gone from my report. The vendor company is pursuing my parents directly for the remaining balance, which is their legal right to do. I have a case number with the Phoenix Police Department. I have an attorney who is very good at her job. I have a small apartment in Austin that I pay for myself, where every single thing within its walls belongs to me and was acquired honestly, and when I come home at night, it is quiet in the way that only genuine safety is quiet. Not the silence of being alone, but the silence of not being afraid of what the next phone call will say. I still think about the light over the caldera. I think about sitting on that terrace with my coffee in the early morning, before the tourists were up, watching the sun come over the eastern edge of the island. I think about my brother crying at the altar, and how real that was, and how I hope it stays real for him. I think about my mother's handwriting on the refrigerator notes when I was 7, and how long the distance is between that and a forged signature on a fraudulent contract. I don't have a tidy conclusion for you. I have a case number, a clean credit report, and a slowly healing understanding that loving someone and trusting someone are not the same thing. That family is not a debt you can never finish paying. That the most expensive thing I ever bought was not a plane ticket to Greece. It was the 32 years I spent believing that my responsibility to the people who raised me was unlimited. That account is closed now. The balance is 0. And for the first time in my adult life, I mean that in every sense of the word.